Before he played his final note, Eddie Palmieri left behind a sound that felt like both a celebration and a farewell. The world of Latin jazz is mourning the loss of one of its most electrifying architects. Eddie Palmieri, the Grammy-winning pianist, whose hands danced across the keys like fire and silk, has died at the age of 88. His passing marks the end of a chapter in music history that began in the streets of Spanish Harlem and grew into a global movement. For more than 6 decades, Palmieri was more than a musician. He was a revolutionary force. Known for fusing traditional Afro-Caribbean rhythms with jazz harmonies and fearless improvisation, he created a sound that was as complex as it was intoxicating. His concerts were never just performances, they were ceremonies, where pianos became drum sets, where dancers could not keep still, and where every note carried the weight of history. But behind the charisma, the genius, and the sparkle of countless awards was a man who carried his music like a personal diary. Those close to him say that in his final years, Palmieri often spoke of music as a kind of memory, a way of holding on to people and places that time had taken away. "Every chord I play is a conversation with someone I miss," he once said during an interview. His last public performance, just months before his passing, was a masterclass in both joy and vulnerability. Between songs, he told the crowd, "I have played all my life to keep my heart alive. Tonight, I play to keep yours alive too." Many in the audience had tears in their eyes long before the final ovation. Eddie Palmieri's story is not just about success. It is about a boy from New York City who turned the sounds of his neighborhood into a language the world could understand. It is about the cost of carrying an entire culture on your shoulders and the loneliness that can come when the music stops. And perhaps most of all, it is about the moments we never saw, the ones when the crowd was gone, the stage was empty, and Palmieri sat alone at the piano, playing for himself. Now the question lingers. What truths were hidden between the notes of his final songs? And what legacy will those melodies leave behind? To understand Eddie Palmieri, you have to step into mid-century New York City when the air in Spanish Harlem was thick with the sounds of mambo, cha-cha-cha, and the first rumblings of boogaloo. Born in 1936 to Puerto Rican parents, Eddie grew up surrounded by music. It was not something he discovered later in life. It was the language of his childhood. His older brother, Charlie Palmieri, was already a respected pianist, and young Eddie would watch him play, mesmerized by how the keys could summon both rhythm and emotion at once. In the 1940s and 50s, New York was a melting pot in the truest sense. Afro-Caribbean musicians shared stages with jazz innovators. Dance halls pulsed with life every night. The Palladium Ballroom was a cathedral for Latin music, where titans like Tito Puente and Machito reigned. It was here, in this vibrant but competitive scene, that Eddie began shaping his own voice. The piano for Eddie was never just an instrument. It was a drum set with strings, a place where melody and rhythm could collide without apology. Influenced by jazz greats like Thelonious Monk and Horace Silver, as well as Cuban masters like Arsenio Rodriguez, he began blending complex harmonies with Afro-Caribbean rhythmic structures. This fusion would become his signature, a sound that could make your heart race and your body move at the same time. By the early 1960s, Eddie Palmieri was no longer just Charlie's younger brother. He was a force in his own right. Forming La Perfecta in 1961, he dared to break from tradition. Instead of a typical horn section, he used trombones to create a bolder, earthier sound. It was risky, but it worked. The streets, the dance floors, and eventually the record stores embraced it. Songs like Azúcar Patay and Muñeca became anthems, not just for Latinos in New York, but for anyone drawn to music that refused to stand still. Yet beneath the electric energy of his performances, there was always something deeper at play. Palmieri's music carried a kind of defiance, a refusal to let cultural heritage be diluted or forgotten. He was not just playing for entertainment. He was preserving a history, a memory, and a pride that had been hard-won in a city where immigrants fought daily for space and respect. The theme that runs through Eddie's life is one of fearless innovation tethered to cultural roots. He pushed boundaries but never abandoned the traditions that shaped him. His career is a testament to the idea that you can honor the past while creating something entirely new. This balancing act between heritage and experimentation, between joy and struggle, would define both his music and his personal life. As the decades passed, Eddie Palmieri became a living bridge between generations. Younger musicians saw him as proof that innovation could coexist with authenticity. Audiences felt the truth in his playing, whether they were hearing him in a small club or at an international festival. But while the world saw a man at the center of the stage, driving entire orchestras with his energy, those close to him knew that Eddie's truest moments happened off stage. Alone at the piano, he would often play pieces no one else ever heard, pouring into them the parts of himself that even decades of public performance could not touch. In Eddie Palmieri's world, music was never just notes. It was identity, survival, and legacy woven into one. And as we move into the heart of his story, we will see how this relentless drive to merge innovation with tradition brought him to the heights of fame and into the shadows that came with it. Eddie Palmieri's ascent was not accidental. It was built note by note, performance by performance, in a city that demanded both grit and genius from its musicians. By the early 1960s, he had already made his mark with La Perfecta, the orchestra that dared to rewrite the rules of Latin dance music. The trombone-heavy arrangements were a gamble in a scene dominated by trumpets and saxophones. But Eddie had an ear for texture. He wanted a sound that could punch through the air like a heartbeat, something raw and irresistible. Audiences responded instantly. Dancers filled the floor, and critics began paying attention. One of his earliest breakthroughs came with the 1965 album Azúcar Pa' Ti. It was not just a record, it was a declaration. The title track ran over 8 minutes, an audacious move in a radio market that preferred short, catchy singles. But Eddie was never one to compromise artistry for airplay. That decision paid off when the song became a cultural landmark, earning him his first Grammy Award in 1975, a full decade after its release. Palmieri's rise was fueled by his fearless blending of genres. While other bandleaders stayed in their lanes, Eddie was moving between them, merging salsa with jazz improvisation, infusing traditional Cuban rhythms with modern harmonic structures. He was as comfortable trading solos with jazz legends like Cal Tjader and Dizzy Gillespie as he was driving a packed salsa dance floor into a frenzy. The 1970s were a period of both triumph and transformation. Albums like Harlem River Drive broke barriers, bringing together Latin musicians and African-American funk and soul artists in ways the industry had never seen. It was political, it was cultural, and it was deeply personal. Eddie saw music as a form of resistance, a way to confront social inequality without saying a word. The grooves carried the message, and the people danced to it without realizing they were also absorbing a protest. But success did not come without its shadows. The relentless schedule of touring, recording, and leading large ensembles took its toll. Maintaining a big band was expensive, and the Latin music industry was volatile. There were moments when Eddie faced financial strain, even as his name was celebrated internationally. He often spoke about the challenges of keeping his musicians paid and his vision intact in a business that frequently prioritized profit over artistry. Yet his resilience was unmatched. In the 1980s and 90s, while some artists faded from the spotlight, Eddie reinvented himself repeatedly. He embraced new recording technologies, collaborated with younger musicians, and continued to expand his sound. His 1984 album Palapa Rumba and later works like Listen Here in 2005 showed that age had not dulled his creative edge. In fact, the depth of his playing only grew richer, more nuanced, more deliberate. By the time he entered his later years, Eddie Palmieri had won multiple Grammy Awards, toured the world countless times, and influenced an entire generation of musicians. He had played at Carnegie Hall, in intimate jazz clubs, at massive outdoor festivals, and even in countries where audiences could not understand the lyrics but felt the pulse all the same. And yet, through all of this, Eddie remained humble. He would often tell interviewers that his greatest joy was not the awards or the applause, but the moment when the band locked into a groove so tight it felt like flying. "That's when the music takes over," he said, "and I'm just along for the ride." But behind the spotlight was another story, one of quiet sacrifices and the emotional weight of a lifetime spent carrying the torch for a culture. Friends and family recall moments when Eddie would sit alone after a concert, his hands resting on the keys long after the crowd had gone, as if reluctant to leave the music behind. The rise of Eddie Palmieri is not just about the creation of a legendary career. It is about the stubborn determination to keep creating, no matter the obstacles. It is about defying an industry that often tried to box him in, and about choosing, again and again, to play the music he believed in, rather than the music that might have been easier to sell. He was not just rising in fame, he was rising in purpose. And that purpose would carry him through decades of change, even as the world around him shifted in ways he could never have predicted. Eddie Palmieri's music was pure joy to those who heard it, but behind the brilliance was a lifetime of unspoken struggles. His career had been a dazzling arc of innovation and influence, yet the cost of that journey was something only a few ever saw. In his later years, Palmieri began speaking more openly about the challenges that had shadowed his career. He admitted that being a band leader was as much a burden as it was a privilege. He carried the responsibility of not only his own livelihood, but the livelihoods of every musician who stood beside him on stage. There were nights when the applause was thunderous, but the money barely covered the cost of keeping the band together. The Latin music industry was often unforgiving. Shifts in popular taste, economic downturns, and the constant demand for fresh hits placed pressure on even the most established artists. Eddie, known for his refusal to compromise his sound, often walked away from opportunities that might have made him richer, but would have diluted his art. This stubborn integrity won him respect, but it also meant enduring lean years when his phone rang less and his calendar had gaps. Away from the stage, the relentless travel took its toll on his personal life. Friends described how much he missed family events, how often he was away when milestones happened at home. Eddie gave everything to the music, one close friend said, and sometimes that meant there was very little left for himself. There was also the physical strain. Decades at the piano, pounding complex rhythms with both hands, began to wear on his body. In private, he dealt with joint pain and fatigue that would have ended the careers of lesser musicians. Yet, night after night, he walked onto the stage and poured out the same fiery energy that had made his name in the 1960s. Only when the lights dimmed did the exhaustion show. Perhaps the most haunting truth came in the quiet moments after a performance. Those who worked closely with him recalled how Eddie would linger at the piano after the audience had gone, his fingers moving slowly over the keys, playing melodies no one else would ever hear. That's when he was talking to himself, one bandmate said. That's when the music was just for him, not for us. In his final interviews, Palmieri reflected on mortality and legacy. You can play a million notes in your life, he told a journalist, but the real question is, what did you leave in the hearts of the people who heard them? He knew he had changed the sound of Latin jazz forever, but he also knew that the people he loved most had sometimes seen less of him than the strangers who filled his concerts. When the news of his passing broke, the reaction was immediate and heartfelt. Musicians across genres, from salsa stars to jazz icons, shared stories of how Eddie had inspired them. Younger pianists posted videos playing his riffs, often with tears in their eyes. Cultural institutions paid tribute not just to his awards and achievements, but to his role as a protector of heritage, a man who kept Afro-Caribbean rhythms alive in an ever-changing musical landscape. Fans gathered outside clubs where he had once played, leaving flowers, records, and handwritten notes on the steps. Some blasted his music from car stereos in the streets of Spanish Harlem, turning the neighborhood into a living memorial. The media remembered him as El Maestro, but among musicians, the phrase that came up most often was the heartbeat. Because for over 6 decades, Eddie Palmieri's music had been exactly that: a pulse, a rhythm, a lifeline for anyone who needed to feel alive. And now in the silence he left behind, the world is still listening, still moving to the beat he created, still searching for the truths he left between the notes. At Legends and Secrets, we have told many stories of artists whose lives were marked by innovation, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to their craft. Eddie Palmieri belongs to a rare group of musicians whose work is not only heard but felt, whose artistry transforms from sound into something deeper: memory, identity, and cultural pride. Palmieri was not just a pianist, he was an architect of sound who built bridges between genres, communities, and generations. His fearless blend of Afro-Caribbean rhythms with the harmonic complexity of jazz expanded what Latin music could be, inspiring countless artists who followed. He proved that tradition and experimentation could coexist, that music could honor its roots while still reaching for the unknown. What makes Eddie's legacy so compelling is his complete refusal to dilute his art for commercial comfort. In an industry often driven by market trends, he remained devoted to authenticity. This meant that his career was not always the easiest path. There were times when his choices kept him from mainstream commercial dominance. But in doing so, he ensured that his music remained pure, his message uncompromised, and his influence enduring. We also see in Eddie's story a reminder of the sacrifices that come with greatness. While audiences celebrated his energy on stage, few understood the physical strain, the financial pressure, and the personal losses he endured to keep his vision alive. His story invites us to question how we value artists, not just for their output, but for the lives they live behind the music. Eddie Palmieri's work speaks across borders and languages. His compositions are studied in conservatories and played in street festivals. They belong as much to the global music canon as they do to the neighborhoods of New York where they were born. His reach was not limited to fans of Latin jazz. Anyone who values passion, precision, and soul in music can find something to love in his work. Now we turn to you. When you listen to Eddie Palmieri, what do you hear? Do you hear the young pianist in Spanish Harlem, crafting a new sound from the rhythms of his childhood? Do you hear the seasoned bandleader leading his musicians through an explosive live performance that leaves no one sitting still? Or do you hear something else? A heartbeat, a memory, a reminder of where you come from and what you carry forward. Eddie's legacy is more than awards or records. It is a living pulse that continues to inspire and challenge musicians and listeners alike. And that, more than anything, may be his greatest gift. Some stories end with a final performance. Eddie Palmieri's story will never end, because his music is still moving through the world like a living current. He was a man who carried a century of rhythm in his hands. Every note he played held the weight of his heritage, the fire of his innovation, and the intimacy of his personal truth. For over 6 decades, he invited us into his world, a place where tradition and daring invention could exist side by side. In the quiet after his passing, the echoes of his piano still fill dance halls, concert stages, and city streets. Somewhere, a young musician is sitting at a keyboard, trying to master the tumbao patterns Eddie made famous. Somewhere else, a couple is dancing in their kitchen to Azúcar Pa' Ti, unaware that the man behind the music once played it with the same love for life they now feel in their steps. Eddie never chased celebrity for its own sake. He chased the groove, the perfect harmony, the spark that turned a performance into something sacred. Even in his last years when the pace slowed, his spirit never did. He spoke often about the joy of teaching younger generations, passing on not just the notes, but the philosophy, that music should move the body and the soul at the same time. Perhaps that is the essence of Eddie Palmieri's legacy. It is not confined to records, awards, or written histories. It lives in the way his music makes people feel: alive, connected, seen. It lives in the memories of packed dance floors and smoky jazz clubs, in the warm laughter of rehearsals, and in the solitary moments when his fingers found a melody only he would ever hear. Some stories are never told, but now you know. Eddie Palmieri leaves behind more than a body of work. He leaves behind a heartbeat that will continue to guide dancers, inspire musicians, and remind us all that culture is a living, breathing thing. This was Eddie Palmieri, and the music, like the man, will never truly be gone.